Welcome back. This is video 4 for chapter 11 with Professor Ren, and we are still discussing labor unions. So we said before that labor unions want improved working conditions and they want wages that are above that of the market wage. How do they get that done? Well, for one thing, they have months of negotiations, but there are 3 strategies that they use. They increase the demand for labor. They're just using economics. They decrease the supply of labor. And they pressure employers via negotiations. Now, let's go back to basics of demand and supply. A rightward shift in the demand curve will increase the wage. A leftward shift in the supply curve will also increase the wage. This is just basic demand and supply that we've learned before, right? So how do they actually do that? Well, here we go. This is all in your booklet as well as in your textbook, but let's look at how they do it. They recruit a lot. They increase the demand for labor. First, by featherbedding. Okay, what is featherbedding? Think of what that image is. You are making someone comfy, right? So featherbedding is like, I love sleep. I love using down sofas and down pillows, and you probably do too. They're very comfortable. How do you make the worker comfortable? Well, you either reduce the number of hours that reduce their productivity, which means that they could take longer to get a job done. So you reduce their productivity. So for instance, before it was mandatory that per shift a minimum of 10 units is what someone should produce, and now the minimum becomes 9 units. So that gives a person a little bit more ease on the job. But what it does do is if everybody else doesn't have to meet 10 either, then it's likely that either overtime would be offered or additional employment would be offered. So because of the overtime or because of the additional number of workers that have to be hired, that's an increase in demand for labor that's going to increase wages. That's featherbedding. Now, what is recruiting? It's as simple as what it sounds, attracting new members. This is one we just recently learned that's, per location. So think of how unions get started. If you take Starbucks, not every location has voted on a union, only a very particular address has. So those workers at that particular address, same thing with manufacturing plants. It could be one plant in one town out of 5 that has a union and the other 4 do not, or 3 out of 5 but the other 2 do not. So the union tries to say, let's convince people to vote to have a union so we can negotiate on their behalf. They will pay a fee and their wages will go up. 3 is beefing up the sales of union labels. Now, I haven't been seeing that very much, but, it seems like a million years ago. They used to have these commercials on TV for the cotton commercials, and they will say, buy label, the blue label, which is the union label for cotton. And the idea is, don't buy any t-shirt, buy the one that was made by union workers. And this is a patriotic thing, a camaraderie of some sort. So it generates derived demand. In other words, we learned the concept of derived demand. The consumer looks for the t-shirt that is made by union, and therefore more union members are hired because other companies might consider that maybe having union workers is a good thing if the consumer is looking for that label and is willing to pay a little bit of a premium. And 4 is rent seeking, and this is when unions lobby Congress to simply give them the jobs. So think sometimes of how some politicians say things like, I created 20,000 jobs. Perhaps what could have happened is there was a road that needed fixing, and they voted to award the contract to a company that had a bunch of union members, about 20,000 worth, and then they go ahead and they say, well, we increased jobs by X number of workers. So they try to get contracts from the government. They try to get politicians to, give them certain jobs so they can fulfill those positions for their members. And this is how unions increase the demand for labor. That all boosts the wages. How do they increase wages? By reducing the supply of labor. Well, one is toughening the standards, right? Where you want fewer people to do a job, you make it where it's harder to qualify for the job. So for instance, nurses sometimes, if you ever found a job where you're like, why do I really have to go through this grueling exam to take this? Like for instance, in some states, plumbers have to know advanced math. How often are they really using it? Maybe not much, but if you want to restrict the number of plumbers, you make their math classes harder. Think of a CPA. Why is the CPA exam so difficult? Do CPAs actually practice most of the stuff on the test? No. Then why is it on the test and why is it so hard? Because the fewer the people who can acquire that certification, the fewer the people who can say, I am a CPA, the higher the rates that the CPA can charge per hour. So this is an agreed upon, let's keep the number of CPAs lower by making the standards tougher. 2 is increasing licensing fees. This is a pretty weak one, honestly. You know, like for instance, a builder's license can be $700. $700 is not $7. It's significant, but if you're a builder and you're making $100,000 a year and then they make your license $800 instead of $700, I don't think you're going to stop being a builder because they raised the licensing fees. So I'll give you a better example of how maybe this is applicable. For instance, a few years back, Springfield, Massachusetts, that barbers can no longer, who have been barbers for a long time, can no longer use the old licenses which required less schooling. Suddenly they said, even if you've been a barber for so long, if you started after a certain date, you have to go and do X number of months at a school, and it can cost you something like $10,000 to get that license to remain a barber. Well, I can see at that point how someone might quit, or more than one person might quit the industry. And the idea is if there are fewer people doing it, that can boost the wages of barbers. This is just an example. And 3 is lobby for firmer immigration laws. Anytime you hear somebody up at arms about getting people from Central America, for instance, to do the picking seasonally, or what they're basically saying is, you're bringing cheaper labor to compete with union labor, and we don't want that. What we prefer is that companies don't have the ability to hire somebody who's willing to pay for less. That way they will take our members. So those are the 3 ways. So it's still type of rent seeking, but it's a rent seeking with a particular purpose. Let's make the laws tougher on immigration. Now, how do firms react to all of this? Well, firms have a couple of 2 things that they can do. This is very popular. I hope it never happened to you, but sooner or later it seems to be happening to people. The company replaces the workers with an automation or some sort of artificial intelligence program. So, think for instance of how hard it is sometimes to get a live person because you have to go through an AI that vets you. Before it used to be a person who vetted you, but now it's an AI and it drives us all crazy. The second thing that they can do is leave the jurisdiction of the union. Meaning if this is a Northeast union, the company can move out of the Northeast. If this is a US union, the company can go maybe to Mexico, which is why they've done it. So they leave the jurisdiction or they automate, they replace labor with capital. That's the other way that they actually do it. This is pretty much what there is to know about this chapter. Of course, like always, you have questions, you email me. Don't forget the outlines, don't forget the other videos, don't forget the exercises, very important on the exercises, and all of this should come in handy for the exercise and for preparations for exams. Okay guys, I will see you in the next chapter. You have a great one. This is our last one. Aren't you relieved?